Two worlds collided the moment a homeless child stepped into the VIP hallway, and destiny shook. A billionaire's daughter was slipping toward death, and every doctor had given up hope. But miles away, under a leaking Harlem bus stop, a homeless black girl unknowingly carried the only thing that could bring the child back. When their paths finally crossed, the world would learn that the smallest, most overlooked soul could ignite a miracle no one saw coming. The hallway outside the pediatric intensive care unit glowed with a cold, sleepless light. Machines hummed, rubber soles squeaked on polished linoleum, and somewhere far off, an intercom called a code in a calm, practiced voice. But inside the VIP corner room of St. Helena Hospital, all that noise seemed to fall away, swallowed by the slow, fragile rhythm of one little girl's breathing. Lydia Harrington lay in a bed that looked too big for her 8-year-old body. The blankets were warmed, the pillow was feather soft, and the railings were polished chrome, but none of that mattered. What drew every eye in the room was the monitor above her head, a pale green heartbeat marching across black, sometimes steady, sometimes dipping, like it was tired of trying. Her skin, once a healthy gold, had turned almost translucent. Dark lashes rested on cheeks that had lost their baby roundness. Someone had braided her light brown hair into 2 neat plaits, tied with pale blue ribbons that matched the hospital gown. One ribbon had come loose and dangled over her shoulder, forgotten. Richard Harrington stood at the foot of the bed, still in yesterday's suit. The jacket was off, the tie half untied, shirt sleeves rolled up to his elbows. His clothes were expensive, every stitch screaming power and money, but there was nothing powerful about the way he held himself now. His shoulders slumped, his hands hung uselessly at his sides. He was used to decision rooms and glass towers, to signing contracts that shifted markets, to people waiting for his nod like it was the weather forecast. But here, surrounded by beeping machines and clear plastic tubes, his signature meant nothing. "Mr. Harrington," Dr. Patel said softly, breaking the silence like someone stepping into a church. "We've adjusted her meds. We're doing everything." "I know," Richard cut in, his voice low and rough. "You've said that." The doctor hesitated. She was small, with tired eyes and a badge that read Chief Pediatric Intensivist. But in front of this man, she suddenly felt like a child holding bad news. She glanced at the monitor, watched the lazy rise and fall of Lydia's chest, then looked back at him. "If there's no neurological response in the next 48 hours, she forced herself to say, the chances of meaningful recovery become very slim." "Meaningful recovery," he repeated, as if the phrase offended him. His gaze fixed on his daughter's fingers, resting limp on the sheet. "So you're telling me she has 48 hours to decide if she wants to live or die, and we just stand here?" "It's not about wanting, Mr. Harrington. Her brain—" "I can buy a new jet in an afternoon," he murmured, almost to himself. "Raise 100 million in a week. But I can't fix this." The admission hung there, heavier than any medical term. Behind him, near the window, a nurse adjusted an IV line. Maria Benson had worked this floor longer than most of the doctors. Her hair was gray at the temples now, pulled into a tight bun, her hands careful and practiced. She watched the billionaire with a kind of quiet sadness. She had seen powerful men crumble before, but something about this one, about the way his eyes refused to leave his child, made her chest ache. Lydia didn't respond when the curtain shifted, or when another nurse checked her pupils with a small penlight. She didn't move when Dr. Patel pinched her fingernail, calling her name "Lydia? Lydia, sweetheart?" The only answer was the steady exhale of the ventilator, the soft hiss, the tiny rise of her chest and fall again. "Maybe she hears you," Maria said gently. "We don't know what reaches them. Talk to her, Mr. Harrington. It can help." Richard swallowed hard. For a moment he didn't move. Then he stepped closer to the bed, every step like he was walking through wet cement. He sat down in the chair by her side, a chair that had become his whole world these last weeks. "Hey, kiddo," he whispered, leaning forward. The scent of antiseptic and plastic filled his nose instead of Lydia's usual mix of crayons and shampoo. "It's Dad." He cleared his throat, searching for words he used to find so easily when she was awake. "Remember your birthday at the aquarium?" he said. "You made me stand by that glass tank for an hour, 'cause you thought that one stingray was smiling at you. You said if we left, it'd be lonely." His hand hovered over hers, careful not to disturb the wires taped to her skin. "I'm the one who's lonely now," he said, voice breaking. "So if you want to make things fair, you're gonna have to wake up and annoy me again. Okay?" The monitor kept up its slow, indifferent blinking. Somewhere in the room, a drip clicked over. Lydia's lips parted just enough for the ventilator tube, but there was no flicker of recognition, no tiny squeeze of his fingers. Behind him, Maria turned away to wipe her eyes before anyone saw. Outside the window, New York moved on without them. Yellow cabs streaked past like fireflies on the avenue below, headlights smearing into lines in the glass. People hurried to work with coffee in hand, unaware that 8 stories above them, a man who owned half a dozen skyscrapers could not buy one more smile from his daughter. Down the hall, a TV in the family lounge played the morning news on mute. Stock tickers crawled along the bottom of the screen. One of the companies listed was Harrington Global. The green arrow next to it pointed up. Shareholders were delighted. The market was satisfied. Richard didn't know and didn't care. Dr. Patel checked her watch and then Lydia's chart, filling in a line in the progress notes. Family present. Condition unchanged. She hated those words. Unchanged. As if nothing was happening, when in truth something precious was slipping further away with each passing hour. "Try to rest," she told Richard. "There's a cot in the family suite. We'll call you if there's—" "If there's what?" he snapped, then caught himself. "If there's a miracle?" She didn't answer. Doctors weren't supposed to use that word. When she left, the room grew quiet again, the quiet of waiting rooms and midnight prayers. Richard leaned back in the chair and closed his eyes for the first time in hours. The weight of exhaustion pushed at him, along with a question he refused to say out loud. What if money really was useless here? His phone buzzed in his pocket. Another call from his executive assistant. Another list of things only he could decide. He hit decline without even looking. The world could wait. The board could wait. Everything could wait, except the small heartbeat on the screen in front of him. He didn't see Maria pause at the doorway and look back at Lydia one more time. He didn't see the wrinkle in the nurse's brow, as if she were digging through an old memory she couldn't quite reach. 13 years of faces, of babies and parents and goodbyes, blurred together in her mind. But something about this child, this man, tugged at a thread she hadn't thought of in years. A soft rain started tapping against the window, barely noticeable at first. By the time the sky over Manhattan turned a dull, flat gray, Lydia's monitor had dipped twice, alarms chirping and then settling again when the machines compensated. Each dip pulled a fresh layer of color from Richard's face. "How much more of this can she take?" he whispered. No one answered him. Miles away, in a different part of the city, the same rain slid from the edge of a dirty bus stop shelter in Harlem, falling in thin sheets onto cracked concrete. A bundle of blankets and worn-out coats shifted under the bench, and a skinny brown arm reached out, fingers trying to catch a few stray drops of water as if they were something rare. The girl under the bench shivered, pulled her hoodie tighter, and blinked herself awake. Her stomach growled. Her name, though no one there knew it, was Tessa Miller. She had no idea that in a bright, sterile room across town, a little girl with her same blood type lay fading like the last light at the end of the day. At St. Helena, the clock on the wall ticked past another minute. 48 hours, the doctor had said. In the VIP room, a billionaire father watched his daughter sleep and waited for an answer from a universe that stayed completely, terrifyingly silent. And somewhere under a leaking bus stop, a homeless black girl rubbed her cold hands together and got ready to face another day she didn't think mattered to anyone. Neither of them knew that before those 48 hours were up, their lives would be tied together in a way that would shock the entire city, and that the tiniest, most overlooked person in New York would become the only hope for the child everyone thought could not be saved. The morning light over Harlem was thin and gray, filtering through the clouds like it had grown tired of fighting the rain. Puddles covered the sidewalk, turning every step into a careful dance around cold water that seeped into your shoes for the rest of the day. The buses hissed as they pulled up and pulled away, engines groaning as if they didn't want to work either. Under the shelter, Tessa Miller sat on a flattened cardboard box she used as a mat. Her hoodie was pulled tight around her face, but the wind still found a way in, slipping down the back of her neck like a finger made of ice. She rubbed her hands again, blew warm air into them, then tucked them under her thighs to trap the heat. Her backpack, more duct tape than fabric, rested beside her. The zipper didn't work anymore, so she tied it shut with a shoelace she'd found behind a laundromat. Inside were 3 things she never let out of her sight: a photo of her mother, torn at the edges, a pair of socks she kept clean for special days, and a small notebook where she wrote tiny messages to herself when the world felt especially heavy. Her stomach growled. She ignored it. Across the street, a coffee shop dumped another bag of day-old pastries into a trash bin. Tessa watched the steam rise from the bag's opening, her breath catching for a second. Hot food. But a sanitation truck had parked beside the bin. 2 workers were already tossing bags into the compactor. By the time they finished, the pastries would be gone, crushed, ruined. Figures, she muttered to herself. People passed by without seeing her. A businessman in a long coat, a woman pushing a stroller, teenagers laughing too loud, a jogger in bright shoes splashing water up onto her jeans. Nobody made eye contact. Nobody said, "Good morning." Even the pigeons paid her only the briefest glance before waddling away. She pulled her hoodie tighter. It hadn't always been like this. Not exactly. Before her mother got sick, home had been a tiny apartment on 143rd with peeling paint and a window that let in every siren on the block. It wasn't much, but it was theirs. They used to sit on the floor at night, legs crossed, eating cereal out of plastic cups while watching old cartoons on a flickering TV. When the heat broke in winter, they slept in the same bed, wrapped up like 2 spoons in one blanket. When the eviction notice came, it felt like somebody had unplugged her whole world. Tessa blinked away the memory. Today, like every day, she needed to move before the motuung. Cops started their morning sweep. She stood, stretching sore legs, and slung her backpack over one shoulder. Then her eye caught something near the curb, a tiny flash of color. She crouched down. A child's bracelet lay half submerged in a puddle. It was the kind sold in hospital gift shops, soft plastic beads in pastel colors, strung together on elastic thread. A little charm shaped like a star dangled broken from one end, half torn off. The name printed on the beads had faded, washed out by rain and dirt. But something about it made her reach for it anyway. She picked it up carefully, wiping the beads on her sleeve. Water dripped off the charm onto her wrist, cold enough to sting. For a moment she turned the bracelet over in her fingers, studying it like some kind of puzzle. Where had it come from? A child? A visitor? Maybe someone had dropped it getting off the bus. Maybe it belonged to one of the kids she saw at the shelter sometimes, little ones clinging to their parents' coats. She didn't know why, but she slipped it into her pocket. A bus pulled up in front of her with a loud sigh of brakes. She didn't have fare, so she stepped aside to let the passengers out. As she moved, a man bumped into her shoulder hard enough to make her stumble. "Watch it!" he barked, not even looking at her. "Sorry," she whispered. He was already gone. Tessa steadied herself and stared down at her shoes, duct-taped sneakers she'd found at a donation center months ago. The toes were cracked, soles worn thin. She wiggled them against the wet pavement. Her mother used to say, "Baby, always look where you're going, not where you've been." But lately, Tessa couldn't tell the difference. Everything felt the same gray shade, stretching forward and backward. Her stomach growled again. She headed south, passing graffiti-covered brick walls and steaming manhole covers. A bodega owner shooed her away from the door, even though she hadn't tried to go inside. A group of kids her age crossed the street rather than walk past her. One whispered something that made the others laugh. Tessa kept her head down and pretended not to hear. By the time she reached the community kitchen on 125th, the line had already formed. She didn't join it. She never ate first. Instead, she went around to the side entrance, where Mr. Alvarez, the man who ran the place, was hauling crates of fruit out of a van. "You're early today," he said, wiping sweat from his forehead. "Couldn't sleep. You get any rest at all last night?" Tessa shrugged. "A bit." It was a lie, but he didn't push. He handed her a box of apples. "Wash these for me. And no snacking. They're for the morning crowd." She smiled weakly. "I know." Inside the kitchen, the air was warm, thick with the smell of oatmeal and cinnamon. People were already shuffling in, shoulders hunched against the rain. Tessa stood at the sink washing the apples, carefully, one by one, making sure each was free of bruises. She liked the feeling of doing something useful, even if no one noticed. When the crowd finished eating, she helped wipe tables, stack chairs, mop spills. A little boy dropped his spoon and burst into tears. She crouched down, picked it up, and distracted him with a goofy face until he giggled. "You're good with kids," one of the volunteers said. "I just like making them feel better," Tessa replied. When the rush ended, Mr. Alvarez offered her a half bowl of oatmeal scraped from the pot. She shook her head. "I'm okay. Save it for someone else." "Tessa, I'm really okay." She wasn't. But the place needed the food more than she did. Around mid-morning, she finally stepped outside. The rain had slowed to a drizzle, and the sky was beginning to brighten. She reached into her pocket for warmth and felt the bracelet again. She pulled it out and held it up to the light. Why couldn't she stop thinking about it? Something tugged at her chest. Something she couldn't explain. A strange, quiet urgency, like a whisper she couldn't quite hear. She looked down the street toward downtown, toward the direction of St. Helena Hospital. Not that she knew the bracelet came from there. "Maybe I should try to return it," she murmured to herself. "Someone must be missing it." It was silly. New York swallowed lost things every second. Returning a bracelet to a stranger was impossible. But her feet began walking anyway. Past the puddles, past the buses, past the people who didn't see her. Toward a place she'd never been but somehow felt pulled toward. Toward a little girl she didn't know. Toward a room filled with fear and machines. Toward a story she didn't yet realize she belonged to. And as she crossed the avenue, the bracelet cold in her hand, a sudden gust of wind blew her hoodie back. And for the first time that morning, she lifted her head. She didn't know it yet, but somewhere across the city, a child was fading, and the universe was already guiding her toward the moment they would finally breathe the same air, changing both their lives forever. The walk downtown took nearly an hour. Tessa kept mostly to the edges of the sidewalk, moving like someone who had memorized which parts of the city welcomed her and which parts pushed her away. Harlem's cracked sidewalks slowly gave way to smoother pavement. The buildings grew taller, the cars more polished, the stairs colder. The closer she came to Midtown, the more she felt like she didn't belong. She passed a row of cafes with shiny glass fronts. Inside, people sipped lattes behind glowing laptop screens. A young woman in a blazer noticed Tessa lingering outside and pulled her purse closer to her chest. A doorman sweeping rainwater off the steps of a boutique hotel shooed her away with a flick of his hand. "Move along, sweetheart. Not here." She didn't argue. She just kept walking, eyes on the sidewalk. The bracelet in her pocket felt heavier with each block. When St. Helena Hospital finally came into view, a towering building of white stone and mirrored windows, Tessa stopped. She had never seen a hospital this fancy. She wasn't sure they even let people like her inside. Two security guards stood near the revolving doors, wearing dark blue uniforms and the kind of expressions that said they were ready to tell anyone, no. A steady stream of patients, doctors, and visitors flowed in and out, badges flashing, umbrellas shaking off rain. Tessa swallowed. "You're just returning something," she whispered to herself. "Just do it quick, no trouble." She walked toward the entrance, adjusting her hood so it hid most of her face. As she reached the front steps, a woman bumped her shoulder and muttered, "Watch where you're going." Another man stepped around her like she was a wet bag of trash. Her hands trembled as she pushed through the revolving door. Inside, the lobby shone like a palace. Marble floors so clean they reflected the ceiling lights, a grand chandelier dripping with crystals, and soft music playing from unseen speakers. People moved with purpose, confidence. Nurses in scrub sets walked briskly, badges swinging. Families huddled together near elevators. A volunteer passed out maps and smiles. No one smiled at Tessa. She kept her eyes down and followed the directory on the wall. Pediatric Intensive Care Unit, 8th floor. She reached the elevator and pressed the button, glancing left and right as if someone would suddenly stop her. The doors opened with a ding, and she stepped inside. By the time she reached the 8th floor, her heart was pounding. Everything here felt quieter, colder. The walls were pale blue, the chairs a soft gray. The smell of antiseptic was sharper, like it meant business. A nurse pushed a cart past her, barely glancing in her direction. Tessa spotted a large glass window labeled Pediatric ICU, Authorized Visitors Only. She wasn't authorized, not even close, but something pulled her forward. An instinct, a whisper, something she couldn't name. She reached the window and peeked in. That's when she saw Lydia for the first time. The little girl lay so still, her small hands resting on top of the blanket, tubes and wires tracing paths across her arms. Her eyelashes were long and soft against her pale cheeks. Machines surrounded her like metal guardians, blinking and beeping in steady rhythms. Tessa's breath caught. There was something fragile about the child. Not just the illness, something else. A loneliness she recognized deep in her bones. "Can I help you?" Tessa spun around. A nurse stood behind her, sharp eyes, crisp uniform, clearly not pleased. Tessa stammered. "I found this." She pulled the bracelet from her pocket and held it out like an offering. "I thought it might belong to someone here. Maybe a kid." The nurse looked at the bracelet, then at Tessa. Really looked this time. Her expression hardened. "You shouldn't be wandering around up here. This is a restricted floor." "I'm sorry," Tessa whispered. "I didn't mean anything bad. You need to take that to Lost and Found on the 1st floor." "But I just wanted to see if—" "Lost and Found," the nurse repeated, firmer. Another nurse passing by slowed, eyeing Tessa with suspicion. "Is everything okay here?" She shouldn't be up here, the first nurse said. I'll escort her down. No! The word slipped out before Tessa could stop it. Please, I just want to return it. That little girl. She gestured weakly toward the window. She looks like she... You don't get to look at our patients, the nurse snapped. Come with me now. She reached for Tessa's arm. At that exact moment, an alarm inside the ICU room chirped. Both nurses startled, turning toward the sound. Inside, Lydia's body jerked ever so slightly, no more than a twitch, but it was enough to make the doctors rush forward. A monitor spiked and settled again. The nurses hurried inside, forgetting Tessa entirely. Now alone in the hallway, Tessa took a single step closer to the glass. The bracelet warmed in her hand. Her pulse raced. Something about the little girl on the bed made her chest tighten. Not fear, not pity. Something more familiar, like tugging at a thread from a sweater she used to own. A voice echoed down the hallway. Hey, you there? She flinched. A security guard jogged toward her, hand on his belt. No visitors past the waiting area, he said sternly. Let's go, now. I didn't mean, come on, you can't be wandering around here. He reached for her elbow. His grip wasn't rough, but it was firm enough to make her stumble forward. Another guard joined him, and just like that, the same pattern she knew too well repeated itself. Suspicion first, accusation second, action third. They ushered her toward the elevators. As the doors closed, Tessa glanced back through the narrowing gap. Just before the metal panels met, she caught one last glimpse of Lydia's tiny frame on the bed. For a split second, their eyes met. Or at least it felt that way. A pulse of recognition shot through her, sharp enough to make her inhale. Then the elevator doors shut. The bracelet slipped from her fingers and hit the elevator floor with a soft tink. But she didn't pick it up. She just stood there, heart pounding like she'd seen a ghost. In the ICU room behind the glass, Lydia's monitor dipped again, then steadied, just as if something, or someone, had brushed against her fading world. And outside the elevator shaft, a nurse paused mid-step, frowning, as if a memory from long ago whispered through her mind and vanished before she could catch it. The elevator carrying Tessa drifted downward with a soft mechanical hum, but every floor it passed made her chest tighten more. The guards beside her stood stiff as pillars, their radios crackling with distant chatter. She kept her hands clasped in front of her, but her fingers kept trembling, not from fear of the guards, but from something she didn't understand. She could still feel it. A pull, a thread. Like the little girl behind the glass had reached out without moving at all. When the elevator landed on the ground floor, the doors opened with a metallic sigh. Let's go, the security guard said. Tessa stepped out into the bright lobby, blinking against the polished lights. People stared. Not long, but long enough to make her shrink into herself. A mother tugged her son away. A man in a suit frowned and moved to the other side of the walkway. I didn't touch anything, she murmured. I didn't hurt anybody. But no one heard her. The guards escorted her all the way to the revolving doors. Only when she was outside, rain starting again in thin, cold curtains, did they turn away. Don't come back up, one said, not unkindly, but without warmth. As they walked back inside, Tessa stood on the concrete steps, hair damp, heart pounding. She pulled the bracelet from her pocket and stared at it. The pale beads caught the gray light. Why do I care so much about this? She whispered. For a moment she thought about leaving it on the steps, pretending none of this happened, pretending she hadn't felt something crack open in her chest when she saw the girl behind the glass. But she couldn't. She stepped down onto the sidewalk, ready to walk away, but froze when she heard shouting behind her. Code Blue, room 812, move! Doctors and nurses sprinted past the sliding doors, shoes smacking the tile. The urgency in their voices made the hairs on Tessa's arms rise. Something was wrong. Terribly wrong. She turned toward the doors. Her feet moved before her mind decided. Inside, chaos erupted on the 8th floor. Alarms wailed in a frantic chorus. Lydia's monitor had dipped again, but this time it didn't steady. The green line flickered wildly, then plateaued into a flat, terrifying whisper. "Starting compressions!" a doctor shouted. Richard stood paralyzed near the foot of the bed, his face ashen. He didn't blink, didn't breathe, didn't seem alive himself. "No, no, no, no," he whispered. Nurses rushed around the bed. The ventilator hissed louder. A crash cart banged into the wall. The doctor lifted Lydia's small, lifeless hand, then quickly placed it back down. "Charging to 40!" A paddled defibrillator was pressed to her tiny chest. Her body jerked. The line stayed flat. "Again!" Dr. Patel yelled. Outside the ICU doors, Tessa arrived breathless at the security checkpoint. She shouldn't have been there. She knew that. But her instincts had pushed her all the way back up the stairs instead of waiting for the elevator. "You can't be here," a guard barked, reaching out. But at that exact moment, a group of staff burst through the ICU doors, wheeling another machine in. The guard turned to help them, and Tessa slipped past him, darting inside. The world inside felt too bright, too loud, too terrifying. Lydia lay motionless under the harsh lights, drowned in wires and tubes. Her tiny chest didn't rise. "No response!" a nurse cried out. "We're losing her," another whispered. Richard covered his face with both hands. "She needs," Tessa gasped, pushing her way through the crowd without thinking. She's scared." The nurses spun toward her in shock. "You," one snapped. "Get out! Security!" But before anyone could pull her back, someone bumped her shoulder hard, and she stumbled forward, right into the side of the bed. Her hand flew out and landed gently on Lydia's. The room froze. The monitor beeped once, long, low, then again, then faster, a rhythm, a real one. "Wait, hold on," a tech stammered, staring at the screen. "Her heart rate, it's climbing." The flat line wavered, then formed a fragile green wave, shallow but unmistakably alive. Richard dropped his hands and stared. What did she do?" The nurses were speechless. Dr. Patel leaned so close to the monitor, her glasses nearly touched it. I don't know how, but she's responding," the doctor whispered. "Get her back!" a nurse yelled, pushing the cart aside to adjust Lydia's ventilator. The room fell into a stunned silence, broken only by the soft beeping of life returning. Tessa stood completely still, her hand still resting on Lydia's. She didn't understand what happened. She didn't know why her touch mattered. She only knew that in that moment, she felt the same pull again, stronger, deeper, like her heart recognized something before her mind could. A force like gravity, or blood, or memory. "She's still here," Tessa whispered, tears in her eyes. "She's still fighting." A nurse finally snapped out of her trance and grabbed Tessa's arm. "You can't be in here, you need to leave." This time her voice shook, not from anger, but from fear at what she had just witnessed. "I didn't mean to," Tessa stammered. "Security!" the nurse called again. "Now!" Richard didn't speak, didn't move. He only stared at the two girls, one fighting to live, the other looking like she'd stepped straight out of a storm and into his daughter's heart. A guard rushed in, took Tessa by the arm, and began pulling her backward. "Please," she begged, looking at Lydia. "Please don't let her be alone." But the guard dragged her toward the door as the medical team closed in around the bed again. Behind them, Lydia's chest began to rise and fall. Not perfectly, not steadily, but enough to bring hope back into the room like a sudden breath after drowning. As the doors slammed shut behind Tessa, the bracelet slipped from her hoodie pocket, landing silently on the ICU floor, right beside the foot of Lydia's bed. No one noticed. Not yet. The ICU doors slammed behind Tessa with a dull, echoing thud, cutting her off from the frantic voices inside. The guard marched her down the hallway, his grip tight on her elbow. The bright fluorescent lights above flickered, reflecting off the polished floor that stretched endlessly ahead of her. "Stop pulling me," she whispered, but her voice barely left her throat. The guard didn't answer. He only tightened his hold. Behind them, doctors moved like shadows behind glass, fighting to rescue a life that had just been slipping away. But here, out in the stark, silent hall, Tessa felt the weight of something else entirely. Guilt. Fear. Confusion. Had she really done something wrong? Had she really helped? Why did touching that little girl feel like touching a piece of herself? Before she could form another thought, the elevator doors opened with a harsh ding. The guard pushed her inside. "Stay put," he ordered. The doors closed, leaving Tessa alone in the metal box. Her heartbeat thudded loud against her ribs. She pressed her palms to the walls, breathing fast, trying to steady herself. "What was that?" she whispered. "Why did she couldn't move?" The elevator descended, each floor passing with a mechanical click. Just before it reached the lobby, she caught a glimpse of herself in the mirrored side panel. Wet hair stuck to her cheeks, eyes wide and raw. "Everything I do is wrong," she muttered, "even when I try to help." The doors opened. This time, the lobby wasn't calm. It was buzzing. Clusters of people huddled together, some with phones out, screens glowing. A woman gasped loudly, pointing at something. A man swore under his breath. Security staff rushed across the marble floor, staff radios crackling. And then, Tessa heard it. "That's her! There she is. Is that the girl from the video?" Video? Her stomach dropped. She turned toward the noise and froze. On a gigantic monitor above the reception desk, a paused video filled the screen. It showed a blurry image of a homeless black girl being yanked by security inside the ICU floor. The title below it burned into her eyes. "Homeless Girl Causes Chaos in Billionaire's Daughter's ICU Wing." Hashtags, comments, thousands of them. Overlaid text read, "What is she doing near a sick child? Who let her in there? Dangerous! Irresponsible!" Someone hit play. The clip showed her stumbling toward Lydia's room. The moment the guard grabbed her, the nurses shouting. None of it showed the monitor spiking when she touched Lydia. None of it showed hope. Only chaos, only her. A floodgate opened. "She's trouble. Probably trying to steal something. These people come in here and ruin everything. Wait, look at her clothes. Doesn't she live on the street? She shouldn't be in a hospital at all." Tessa backed up a step, then another. Her breath hitched as panic crowded her chest. "I didn't do anything," she whispered. "I didn't." A phone flashed in her face. "Hey, why were you in that ICU?" someone demanded. "Did you hurt that kid?" "Look at me," another voice insisted. "Why were you near the billionaire's daughter?" She shook her head, trembling. "I didn't hurt her. I was just—" But the words tangled in her throat. She tried to run, but more people closed in. A man blocked her path. A woman snapped a photo of her tears. She felt like she was drowning inside a crowd made of eyes. Then, "Move!" a security officer barked, forcing his way through. He grabbed her arm again, pulling her toward the door. As she stumbled outside into the rain, he leaned in close. "You need to leave. Now. Don't come back." "But I didn't—" He didn't listen. He didn't care. The revolving door spun her out into the storm, the wind whipping her hoodie back. The city blurred around her, honking taxis, umbrellas bobbing, the steady hiss of rain on pavement. She ran, down the steps, across the sidewalk, into the street, ignoring shouts and horns. She didn't stop until she reached the shadow of the nearest alley, ducking behind a dumpster. She pressed her back against the wet brick wall, and slid down to the cold concrete. Her chest caved in, her hands shook, tears finally spilled over. She clenched the front of her hoodie, pulling it over her face. "I was trying to do something good," she cried. "Why does everything always go wrong?" She curled into herself, the rain mixing with her tears. Hours seemed to pass, though it was probably only minutes. When she finally lifted her head, she saw the glow of a phone screen through the alley's entrance. Someone stood at the curb, watching the same video of her that had the whole lobby in an uproar. And as if the universe wanted to make sure she couldn't escape it, she heard the anchor's clipped voice. "Sources confirm billionaire Richard Harrington has restricted all access to his daughter's room. Hospital security has been instructed to prevent the homeless teen seen in this footage from re-entering the building under any circumstances." A pause. "Authorities are reviewing whether further action should be taken." Further action. She wiped her eyes with the sleeve of her hoodie. Her breath fogged in the cold air. A deep ache settled under her ribs. "I didn't do anything wrong," she whispered to no one. "I didn't." But somewhere across the city, in a hospital room filled with beeping machines and frantic hope, a billionaire father replayed that same video, over and over, each time feeling his anger harden. His jaw clenched, his eyes darkened. He pointed at the screen. "Keep that girl away from my daughter," he ordered, and he meant every word. What none of them understood, not yet, was that the girl they blamed, the girl they feared, the girl they chased into the rain, was the only reason Lydia Harrington was still alive at all. By the time the sky turned from gray to charcoal, New York had swallowed the day whole. Neon signs flickered on along the avenues, headlights smeared across slick pavement, and steam rose from manholes like the city was exhaling something tired and heavy. Far from St. Helena Hospital, far from the polished walls and well-dressed visitors, Tessa moved through the pouring rain like a shadow without a home. Her hoodie clung to her skin, her shoes squished, her breath puffed white in the cold air. She didn't know where she was going, only that she had to get as far away as possible. She turned into an alley near 9th Avenue, stepping over puddles that looked like tiny lakes. The rain hit the metal fire escapes above her, dripping like 1,000 ticking clocks. She pressed herself against a wall, arms wrapped around her shaking body. Why did this always happen? Why did trying to do something good always twist into something ugly? The video, the stares, the shouting. It all replayed in her mind, each frame sharper than the last. "I didn't do anything wrong," she whispered to the empty alley. "I didn't." Her voice cracked. A gust of wind slammed through the alley, rattling a loose metal sign. Tessa flinched, heart jumping. She closed her eyes and forced herself to breathe through the panic clawing at her ribs. When she opened them again, something caught her attention. A thin beam of light reflecting off the bracelet charm still clutched in her fist. She had grabbed it without realizing. She held it up, rain slid down her arm, dripping from the plastic bead shaped like a star. It felt warmer now, as if it remembered something she didn't. "Why do I feel like I know her?" she whispered. The bracelet didn't answer, but something inside her did. A quiet certainty she couldn't name. A siren wailed somewhere behind her. Not close, not far. Just enough to make her heart slam into her throat. She scrambled away from the alley wall, slipping into the street like a frightened deer. She darted across the avenue, arms over her head, as cars honked. A taxi skidded, splashing a wave of icy water over her. A pedestrian cursed as she bumped into them. "Watch it, kid!" "Sorry," she mumbled, though they were already gone. She needed somewhere safe, somewhere quiet, somewhere the cold couldn't reach whatever soft part of her soul was left. Under the Brooklyn Bridge, the roar of traffic blended with the pounding rain. Tessa ducked behind one of the support pillars and curled into a ball. Water dripped steadily from the steel beams above, hitting the concrete near her feet in rhythmic taps. Her teeth chattered. Her fingers ached. She pressed the bracelet to her chest like a talisman. The city stretched around her, enormous and indifferent. No one knew where she was. No one cared. Least of all the people now calling for further action. She closed her eyes and tried to remember her mother's voice. "Baby, you are never alone, even when the world tells you otherwise." But tonight, she felt alone in every way a person could. And somewhere, in a warm room filled with soft lights and expensive machines, Lydia's pulse fluttered like a small bird struggling in cupped hands. The doctors hovered around her, unsure why her vitals had improved so suddenly, afraid of what might happen if they dipped again. Richard stood at the foot of the bed, shoulders hunched, jaw clenched. The storm outside rumbled low, almost like a warning. "How is she?" he asked, voice raw. Dr. Patel shook her head. "For reasons we don't understand, she stabilized. Briefly." "Briefly," he repeated, the word burning. "We're monitoring her very closely, but she's not responding anymore." Maria Benson, the senior nurse, glanced down and noticed something near the wheel of the bed, a small object half hidden beneath a tangle of wires. She bent down, picked it up. A child's bracelet. Her brows pulled together. Where did this come from? A younger nurse shrugged. Probably fell off one of the visitors. Maria turned it over in her hand. Something about it snagged at her memory so sharply she had to grip the rail of the bed to steady herself. Plastic beads, a faded name, a charm shaped like a star. Her heartbeat thundered in her ears. No, it couldn't be. Not after all these years. But the doubt dug deeper, refusing to let go. She slipped the bracelet into her pocket. Behind her, Richard stared at the monitor as Lydia's heartbeat weakened again. He pressed a hand to his mouth, his mind racing. The video online had made one thing clear. That homeless girl was never coming near his daughter again. But something else gnawed at him, an uneasiness he couldn't shake. When she touched Lydia, there had been a reaction. A real one. A surge in the monitor he had seen with his own eyes. Was it a coincidence? A glitch? Or something else? He didn't know. He only knew he wouldn't be able to sleep tonight. He wouldn't be able to do anything but wait. Back under the Brooklyn Bridge, Tessa pulled her knees tighter to her chest. Her breath came out in small white clouds. The night grew colder, sharper. Every sound made her jerk. Footsteps, sirens, wind. She pushed her wet hood off her face and stared at the bracelet in her palms. Something deep inside whispered, "Go back." "No," she told herself, shaking her head hard. "They hate me. They think I'm dangerous. They think I tried to hurt her." But the whisper didn't stop. "Go back." She closed her eyes tightly. I can't do that again." A bartender taking out the trash spotted her from a distance. He hesitated, rain dripping from the brim of his cap. He thought about calling someone, but then shrugged and went back inside. He had his own problems. By midnight, the rain turned heavier, falling in sheets that blurred the world into dark shapes. The wind cut through her wet clothes. Tessa curled tighter, shivering so violently it hurt. She whispered again, but this time the words came out like a plea. "Please, please don't let me disappear." And at that exact moment, miles away, Lydia's monitor chimed a warning. Her pulse dropped. Her breathing faltered. Dr. Patel rushed toward the bed. "Get me epinephrine," she ordered. "Now!" Richard stepped back, hands shaking. "Not again," he whispered. "Please, not again." The ICU doors burst open. Nurses, machines, carts, the room filled with voices rising in panic. Her saturation is falling. We're losing her response. She's slipping. Maria Benson pressed a trembling hand to her mouth. She remembered something her mentor once told her. Some babies enter this world looking for someone, and if they don't find them, they fade. She looked down at her pocket, at the bracelet. Her heart lurched. "Oh, dear God," she breathed. Across the city, under the bridge, Tessa lifted her head suddenly, heart pounding like an unseen alarm had gone off inside her chest. The wind howled. The rain slashed sideways. Her breath hitched. Something was wrong, very wrong. She didn't know how she knew, but she knew. She scrambled to her feet, legs weak and numb, gripping the bridge pillar for balance. Her knees shook. Her lips trembled. Her hand clutched the bracelet so tightly, the plastic beads dug into her skin. "I need to," she gasped, choking on her own breath. "I need to." The wind drowned out her words. She staggered out from under the bridge, rain hitting her face like needles. Her instincts screamed, "Run!" So she did. Through puddles, across the empty street, back toward Manhattan, back toward a destiny she didn't understand yet. And behind her, lost somewhere in the dark, the bracelet charm finally snapped loose from the thread, falling into the storm, its soft, tiny glow swallowed by the rushing water. While Tessa ran blindly through the rain, the storm battering her from every direction, St. Helena Hospital pulsed with a different kind of electricity. Fear. The 8th floor was chaos again. The moment Lydia's vitals had begun to spiral, a red alarm streaked across the monitor, painting the room in urgent flashes. Nurses rushed in, carts rattled across the floor, and Dr. Patel's voice rose above the panic like a thin wire pulled to the breaking point. "She's crashing again! Start another round of ventilation support!" Maria Benson stood near the doorway, clutching the bed railing so tightly her knuckles turned white. She stared at the child, small, breath fading, eyes closed as if the world was slowly slipping away from her. But it wasn't the child's condition that made tears sting her eyes. It was the bracelet in her pocket. She pulled it out with trembling fingers. The pale beads, worn by time and weather, spelled out faded, barely legible letters. The broken star charm still attached to the elastic thread jutted at an angle, like a wound never healed. She whispered to herself, "This can't be. It can't." But her heart said otherwise. 13 years ago, she had stood in a room just like this, holding a newborn who couldn't breathe on her own. 2 babies born early, too early. Twin girls. One stronger, one fragile as paper. She remembered the mother's face, wet with tears, whispering something over and over. "Don't let them take her, please. Don't lose her." The father, Richard Harrington, had been on a business trip overseas. Before he arrived, before he even knew the complications, the hospital made a decision she had never agreed with. One infant transferred to a specialized unit. The other vanished from the records. Silenced. Lost. Maria swallowed hard and looked at the bracelet. She remembered the mother's hands fumbling with it in her final moments, fastening it onto the weaker twin's tiny wrist. "She'll be alone," the mother had cried. "Promise me she won't be alone." And now, years later, that same bracelet had fallen at the bottom of Lydia Harrington's hospital bed. Maria gasped, her breath shaking loose the flood of memories she had spent years trying to forget. "Oh God," she whispered, "we failed them." Behind her, Lydia's vitals plummeted again. Dr. Patel gripped the rails. "We're losing her a second time. Prep for—" Before she could finish, a sudden sharp beep spiked the monitor. High, bright, impossible. Richard turned toward the sound, eyes wide. What was that? No one knew. Lydia hadn't moved, hadn't opened her eyes, but something inside her, some faint spark, had flared just long, enough to interrupt the decline. It was the same spike that had occurred earlier, when that girl, the one from the video, had brushed against her hand. Maria stepped back, breath shallow. It wasn't coincidence. It wasn't random. It was connection. Something she could no longer ignore. She looked at Richard, at the lines etched deep into his face, at the grief that clung to him like a second skin. He had no idea, none, what had happened in this hospital all those years ago. Her voice trembled as she approached him. "Mr. Harrington, I need to speak with you." He didn't look away from the monitor. "Not now, Maria." "It can't wait," she insisted, though her voice nearly broke. "It's about your daughter. About the other one." Richard's head snapped toward her. "The other what?" Maria took a step closer. A lifetime of guilt pressed down on her shoulders. But she knew hiding the truth any longer would be a sin her conscience could no longer carry. She opened her mouth. But the ICU doors slammed open. A resident burst through, panting. "Dr. Patel, the labs from earlier. There's something strange about the genetic markers." "Not now," Dr. Patel barked, her hands still deep in the frantic fight for Lydia's pulse. The resident hesitated, then stepped further inside. "But these markers, they look like they belong to a—" "Out!" another nurse snapped. "Unless you're helping in here, out!" The resident stumbled backward, nearly colliding with Maria. Papers fluttered from his clipboard, skidding across the floor. Among them, a chart labeled Neonatal Genetic Cross-Comparison, Harrington Case. Maria bent, snatching it before the storm of feet could crush it. One glance made her knees go weak. 2 profiles. 2 near-identical sequences. 2 signatures that only twins would share. Richard noticed her staring and snatched the paper from her hand. "What is this?" he demanded. Maria lifted her chin, heart pounding like she was stepping into fire. "The truth," she whispered. But before she could say more, Lydia's monitor blared a shrill alarm. Dr. Patel shouted, "Clear the area!" Nurses swarmed like a hurricane around the bed. Richard froze, the genetic chart clenched in his fist. He couldn't move, couldn't breathe, couldn't imagine losing the only child he had left, without even understanding what this paper meant. He turned to Maria again, desperate. "What truth? What aren't you telling me?" Maria stared at him, thunder rolling outside the windows. Her lips parted, but she could not speak the words. Not yet. Not here. Not with Lydia's life hanging by a thread in the middle of the room. Instead, she glanced at the ICU doors, at the storm outside, at the empty hallway where a girl who should not exist was now running through the night. "Mr. Harrington," she said, voice shaking. "You're missing someone." "What do you mean?" "Your family," she breathed, "is missing someone." Richard staggered back as if she had struck him. Maria took a step closer, lowering her voice. "A girl was in this hospital today. The girl from the video. I recognized her. Another wave of alarms cut her off as Lydia's oxygen levels nosedived. "No," Richard croaked. "Not again." Dr. Patel yelled for a ventilator adjustment. Maria swallowed hard, tears threatening to spill. She looked at the bracelet again, at the tiny charm shaped like a star. A lost child. A fading child. 2 worlds. 2 halves of a story broken apart. And only one way to put it back together. "Find her," Maria whispered, not sure if she was speaking to Richard, to fate, or to herself. "Before it's too late for both of them." Outside, lightning split the sky, illuminating the city in a blinding flash. And miles away, soaked and shaking, Tessa kept running, because something inside her was pulling her back toward a place she believed would never want her. A place she no longer knew was hers. a place where a dying girl was slipping, inch by inch, toward the darkness, waiting for the only person who could pull her back. The storm thickened over Manhattan like a living thing, swallowing lights, blurring traffic into streaks of white and red. Inside St. Helena Hospital, Richard Harrington stood paralyzed at the glass wall of the ICU, watching the rise and fall of his daughter's fragile chest. Every breath looked like borrowed time. Behind him, the floor buzzed with whispers, nurses, interns, techs. They spoke in low, urgent tones, but even from a distance he could sense the shift. Someone knew something big. He turned sharply to Maria Benson, who stood gripping the bracelet in her hands, as though afraid it might slip into the air and disappear forever. "You said my family is missing someone," Richard said, his voice breaking. "What did you mean?" Maria looked around. The hallway was full of staff, too many ears, too many risks. "Not here," she whispered. "But you must listen. There's a girl—" "The girl from the video?" he snapped, anger flashing across his face. "The one who trespassed? Who caused chaos? Who scared my daughter?" Maria's jaw tightened. "Or the one who brought her back?" Richard's breath caught. That sentence, quiet, steady, spoken by a woman who had seen too many miracles and too many tragedies, hit him somewhere he didn't want to admit, somewhere deep enough to feel like truth. "What are you saying?" he demanded. "That girl," Maria hesitated, her voice barely a whisper. "She might not be a stranger." Before Richard could answer, Dr. Patel rushed out of the ICU. "She's fading again," the doctor said. "Her system is too unstable. We can't predict how much longer she has." Richard's world narrowed to a pinpoint. "How do we stop it?" he asked, trembling. "We don't know," Dr. Patel replied gently. "But I've never seen a response like the one she had earlier. Someone, triggered it." Her eyes met Maria's. Maria stepped forward. "She needs that girl." Richard's voice cracked. "But that girl is gone." "Then you'd better find her," Maria whispered. A silence heavier than any thunder settled between them. Richard didn't move, didn't blink. Then, "Call security," he said quietly. Dr. Patel frowned. "For what?" "No," Maria said urgently, shaking her head. "Not security. They don't know where to look." Richard ignored both of them. "Get me Liam. Now." Within minutes, a tall man in a tailored coat pushed through the ICU doors. Liam Brooks, head of Harrington Global's personal security division, was known in Manhattan circles as a problem solver, the kind of man who could find anyone, anywhere. He stood beside Richard. "You called?" Richard pointed at the paused video playing silently on a wall monitor. The grainy image of a small black girl being dragged down the hallway glowed across the screen. "Find her," Richard said. "Tonight. Bring her to me." Liam nodded once. "Describe her." "I don't need to," Richard said. "Everyone online already did." He wasn't wrong. The video had gone viral. It was on every screen in the lobby, every hospital break room, every trending sidebar in the city. Liam signaled to his team. Within minutes, 4 operatives in dark jackets entered the hallway, carrying tablets and radio earpieces. "Spread out," Liam ordered. "Shelters, subway stations, food banks, bridges. Anyone with a camera on that floor, track them down. We need angle footage. We need a clean face shot. Move." They moved like shadows, slipping out of the hospital 2 at a time. Maria stepped close to Richard, voice trembling. "You must understand. This isn't just about a girl who wandered in here." He closed his eyes tightly. "I know." "No," she whispered. "You don't." She reached into her pocket and pressed the bracelet into his palm. His hand jerked at the touch. The beads, faded and cracked, lay warmly against his skin. "What am I looking at?" he asked. "A mistake," Maria breathed. One we made 13 years ago. Richard stared at her. Maria opened her mouth, but a loud, desperate alarm erupted inside the ICU. He spun around. Lydia's monitor flashed red. Her breathing staggered. The line dipped. "Get in there!" Dr. Patel shouted. Nurses stormed the room. Richard pushed the door, but Maria grabbed his arm. "You can't help her in there. Not without finding the other child." He wrenched his arm free and stumbled into the room. "Lydia!" he cried. But she couldn't hear him. Her world was slipping away. As the medical team fought for Lydia's life again, Liam's voice crackled through his earpiece. "We found her." Richard froze. Liam's voice came again, steady, calm, mechanical. "Female, approximately 13, matches the footage. Last seen near the Brooklyn Bridge heading downtown on foot." Richard's voice dropped to a whisper. "Is she safe?" "Not exactly," Liam replied. "Storm's getting worse. She's traveling alone." "Then bring her here," Richard said, his voice cracking. "Please." For the first time in years, he said, "Please." Liam nodded once, then signaled to his team. The search for Tessa Miller began. Under the Brooklyn Bridge, Tessa's lungs burned. Her legs begged her to stop, but something deeper pushed her forward, an ache in her chest, a whisper in her mind. She didn't know she was being watched. She didn't know a wealthy man's entire security division that now roamed the city searching for her. She didn't know Lydia was slipping again. All she knew was the rain, the cold, and the feeling that she belonged nowhere. Her shoe caught on a broken piece of concrete. She stumbled, catching herself on a railing. Her breath came in ragged gasps. "Where do I even go?" she whispered, looking up at the storm that hid the stars. But her body kept moving, toward Manhattan, toward the girl she didn't know, toward the truth she had been running from her whole life. Behind her, a black SUV slid to a stop. Two men stepped out, scanning the street with sharp eyes. "There," one murmured. The wipers squeaked against the windshield as the SUV idled in the rain. And without knowing it, soaked and trembling under the streetlights, Tessa Miller took one more step toward a fate that had been waiting for her since the day she was born. Toward a billionaire father who didn't yet know she existed. Toward a sister who couldn't survive without her. Toward the moment two worlds would collide again and change everything. The rain eased just enough to let the city breathe, but the streets still glistened like rivers of broken glass under the streetlights. Tessa kept moving, shoulders slumped forward, hoodie plastered to her skin, shoes sloshing with every step. Her breath fogged the cold air as she reached the edge of a small park near the East River, a forgotten patch of green, half drowned in puddles and shadows. She paused under the rusted archway of the entrance, chest rising and falling in uneven bursts. Her legs felt like wet rope. Her head spun. Every part of her wanted to collapse. But something, some invisible thread, pulled her deeper into the park. A lonely bench waited under a flickering lamppost. Beside it sat an old man wrapped in a plastic poncho, his beard thick and gray, his hands trembling around a styrofoam cup. Tessa recognized him instantly. "Mr. Clayton?" she whispered. The old man looked up, squinting through the rain. Then his tired eyes softened. "Well, I'll be," he rasped. "Thought you'd be at the shelter tonight." "They wouldn't let me stay," she murmured, brushing wet hair from her face. "Too full. Again." He sighed, then scooted slightly to the side to give her room on the bench. "City's colder than it's ever been." Tessa sat, pulling her knees to her chest. Her hands were ice. Her voice shook. "I didn't know where else to go." "You don't need to explain," he said gently. "Not to me." Silence settled between them, broken only of the distant hum of traffic and the rhythmic patter of rain on the ground. Mr. Clayton rummaged inside a plastic bag and pulled out a slightly squished sandwich. "Take it," he said. She shook her head. "No, it's yours. Girl, you need it more than I do." Reluctantly, she took it, peeling back the soggy wrapper. The taste didn't matter. The warmth did. After a few small bites, she whispered, "Something's wrong. I don't know how to explain it, but something is wrong with that little girl I saw today." Mr. Clayton turned to look at her more closely. "The one on the news?" She flinched. "I didn't mean to be there. I didn't mean to scare anybody. I thought maybe the bracelet belonged to her." He nodded slowly. "Sometimes we end up where we're needed." Her breath caught. "What if I wasn't supposed to be there?" she murmured. "What if I made everything worse?" Mr. Clayton didn't answer. He didn't need to. A sudden sound, a car door slamming, echoed across the park. Tessa stiffened. Mr. Clayton craned his neck, eyes narrowing. "You expecting someone?" "No," she whispered, fear crawling up her spine. Headlights swept across the grass, landing directly on the two of them. A black SUV idled at the curb, its engine a low, thunderous growl. Back door opened, and a tall figure stepped out. Umbrella raised. It wasn't the police. Wasn't a stranger. It was worse. Liam Brooks. The moment she saw him, her breath stumbled. "I knew you might come through here," Liam said, voice calm, steady, a stark contrast to the storm around them. "You shelter the homeless. You help the elderly. You help him." His gaze flicked to Mr. Clayton. "You have a pattern." Tessa stood too quickly, nearly slipping in the mud. "I'm not going with you. No one's forcing you." But his tone said otherwise. "We need your help," Liam continued. "The Harrington girl, her name is Lydia," Tessa snapped. Liam paused. Something shifted behind his eyes. Recognition, maybe respect. "Yes, Lydia, she's crashing again." Those words hit her like a fist to the chest. "She responded to you," Liam said. "Only you." Tessa shook her head violently. "I didn't do anything. I shouldn't have been there. Everyone already hates me." "That doesn't change what happened." "I'm nobody," she whispered. "Just a homeless girl nobody wants." A rustle of leaves behind her made her turn. Richard Harrington stood in the shadows beneath a warped oak tree, rainwater dripping from his coat, eyes fixed on her as if she were the last fragile hope he had left. He hadn't meant to follow Liam, but desperation pulled him from the hospital like a magnet. When their eyes met, his breath caught. Not anger this time. Not suspicion. Something else. Something haunting. "You were with her when she came back," Richard said quietly, stepping into the weak glow of the lamppost. "Her heart responded when you touched her." "I was just trying to return a bracelet," Tessa whispered. He reached slowly into his coat pocket and pulled out that same bracelet. Her bracelet. Her breath hitched. "How did you—" "It fell beside my daughter's bed," he said, "right after you left." The beads, the broken charm, every detail she remembered was there, even the tiny stain she'd never been able to scrub out. "Do you know this bracelet?" he asked softly. Her jaw trembled. "It belonged to my mom. She gave it to me the night before she died. I lost it years ago." Richard closed his eyes as a sharp, painful truth stabbed through him. Maria had been right. This child wasn't a stranger, not even close. When he opened his eyes again, they glistened with something raw. "Tessa," he said, voice breaking in a way that betrayed everything he'd ever been taught about staying composed. "Please come with me. My daughter doesn't have much time." I'm scared, she whispered. So am I. Rain gathered on her lashes. Her small shoulders shook. Mr. Clayton placed a trembling hand on her arm. Sometimes, he said softly, we don't get to choose if we're meant for something. It chooses us. Tessa took a shaky breath. She looked at Liam. She looked at Richard. She looked at the bracelet. Hers. Impossibly hers. Then she nodded once. A quiet, terrified, life-changing yes. Liam stepped forward, opening the SUV door. We'll go slowly. No one will hurt you. But the moment Tessa moved toward the car, her legs buckled. Richard caught her before she fell. He stiffened at the touch. This girl he had feared, blamed, misjudged. But he didn't let go. Not this time. For a moment, Tessa leaned against him, breath heavy, body shaking. He looked down at her wet hair plastered to her forehead, her torn sneakers, her trembling hands. How many times had he walked past children like her without a second glance? He swallowed hard. Let's get you warm, he murmured. Tessa didn't answer. She simply let him guide her into the vehicle. As the door closed, the old man on the bench lifted a hand in farewell. She pressed her forehead to the window glass, watching him grow smaller as the SUV pulled away. The city lights blurred into streaks of gold. Her world was changing, faster than she could understand. But somewhere inside her chest, something whispered. You're going back to where you belong. Back to the sister she'd never known. Back to the truth no one had ever told her. Back to where destiny had been waiting 13 long years for her to arrive. The drive back to St. Helena felt like floating through a dream Tessa hadn't been invited to, but somehow belonged in. The SUV hummed softly as it cut through the wet streets, windshield wipers sweeping away the last traces of a storm that had chased her across the city. Rainwater dripped from her hoodie onto the leather seat, forming a small, trembling pool by her elbow. Across from her, Liam kept his eyes steady on her, studying every small shiver. He didn't speak, not because he didn't want to, but because something about the fragile girl holding the broken bracelet made silence feel safer. Richard, sitting beside him, leaned forward with his elbows on his knees, hands clasped, face pale with something deeper than fear. It was guilt. Every so often he glanced back at her, not like she was a stranger anymore, but like she was a question he didn't know how to answer. When the SUV stopped under the hospital canopy, warm golden light spilled through the open doors. Nurses rushed in the lobby, voices sharp, movements quick. Something was happening, something urgent. Are you ready? Liam asked softly. Tessa swallowed, her throat tight. No, but I can try. That's enough, Richard murmured. He stepped out first, offering his hand, not out of habit, not out of obligation, but because he truly didn't want her to fall. For a moment she hesitated, seeing not the billionaire she had feared, but a man unraveling piece by piece. She took his hand. Inside, the hallways buzzed with tension. Doctors barked orders. The monitors in the ICU cast blue reflections down the corridor. Lydia's room glowed brighter than the others, as though every bulb had been turned up to fight what was happening inside. Maria Benson, the older nurse with silver hair pulled tight beneath her cap, rushed toward them. You found her, she said, breathless, eyes darting to Tessa. Thank God. Richard froze. Is she? Not yet, Maria whispered, but she's slipping fast, faster than before. Tessa clutched the bracelet to her chest. Why? Why me? She whispered. Why does she react to me? Maria looked at her with an expression Tessa didn't understand. Part grief, part awe. You'll know soon, she said. But right now, Lydia needs you. Richard reached out, as if to steady himself against the wall, then straightened, forcing strength into limbs that felt like sand. "Tessa," he said softly. "She responded to you because something inside her recognized you. I don't know how or why, but I believe it." Tessa's lungs squeezed tight. She couldn't breathe, couldn't think, but her feet moved anyway. The moment she stepped into the ICU, the room shifted. Machines beeped faster. Nurses pulled back, parting like a wave. Lydia lay on the bed, a small, fragile shape swallowed in white blankets and wires. Her chest rose only faintly, each breath a tiny battle. Tessa stopped at the foot of the bed. Richard whispered, "Go to her." Her shoes squeaked softly on the floor as she moved closer. She reached the bedside, and the heart monitor dipped, then spiked, then dipped again as though the child's body sensed something new. Tessa's hand hovered over Lydia's. "She's so cold," she whispered. "Touch her," Maria urged. So she did. Barely. Just the faintest brush of her fingertips against Lydia's knuckles. What happened next stole the air from the room. The heart monitor, moments from flatlining, surged upward as though something invisible yanked Lydia back from the edge. Her breathing deepened, shallow but real. Color flickered beneath her pale cheeks. The room fell dead silent. Tessa gasped, jerking back as if shocked by lightning. I didn't do anything." "Do it again," Maria said. "No, I don't want to hurt her." "Sweetheart," Maria whispered, "you are not hurting her." Hands shaking, Tessa reached forward again. Her fingers touched Lydia's wrist, and Lydia's tiny hand curled instinctively around hers. Not randomly, not weakly, purposefully. Like someone recognizing home. A soft sound escaped Lydia's throat, almost a whimper, almost a cry. Richard staggered back a step, one hand covering his mouth. His chest heaved. His eyes brimmed. "My God." The doctors stared, stunned. One dropped his pen. Another pressed a hand to his chest as if steadying his own heartbeat. Liam had frozen in the doorway, jaw clenched, eyes locked on the impossible. Tessa felt tears burn her eyes. "She's scared," she whispered. "She's been scared this whole time." "How do you know that?" a doctor asked gently. Tessa shook her head. "I don't know. I just feel it. Like she was alone and she didn't want to be alone." Maria stepped close, gripping Richard's arm. "Do you see it now?" she whispered. "It's her. It has to be her." But Richard couldn't speak, because Lydia, unconscious, slipping between worlds, lifted her hand and moved it weakly toward Tessa's face. Her eyelids fluttered, not fully opening, but trembling like someone fighting to return. "Tess," she breathed. Richard's knees nearly buckled. "Tessa," Maria whispered, voice thick with emotion. "You're helping her find her way back." The room seemed to pulse around them with quiet awe. The tension, the fear, the chaos, everything shifted. Every person there knew they were witnessing something beyond medicine, beyond logic, something human, something old, something sacred. Tessa didn't understand any of it. She didn't know the story behind her lost childhood, the truth that had been kept from her, the reason Lydia's hand fit into hers like a missing piece of a puzzle. All she knew was this: Lydia needed her. So she stayed. Minutes stretched. Lydia's breathing steadied. The pallor in her cheeks softened. The monitors settled into a slow but strong rhythm, stronger than anything seen all week. No one dared speak loudly. Every voice stayed low, reverent, afraid to break what was happening. Finally, Richard stepped closer, his voice barely above a whisper. "Tessa," he said, trembling. You just gave my daughter the first real chance she's had in days." Tessa didn't move, didn't look away from Lydia. "I didn't save her," she said softly. She's just reaching for something she remembers." "That something is you," Maria murmured. "But I don't even know her," Tessa whispered. Richard closed his eyes. "Yes," he said. "You do." A truth neither of them was ready to face hung in the air between them. Fragile, glowing, undeniable. But there would be time for truths later. Right now, all that mattered was that Lydia was no longer slipping into the dark. She was fighting. Because Tessa was there. And the world, every doctor, every nurse, every person watching, knew they had just witnessed the impossible. A homeless girl holding a billionaire's daughter's hand and bringing her back from the edge of fading. The second touch had changed everything, and the city would never be the same again. News spreads fast in New York, but nothing spread faster than a miracle. By sunrise, whispers crawled down hallways, across nurses' stations, out to waiting rooms where families clutched paper cups of coffee. A girl who'd been fading wasn't fading anymore. And the one who'd pulled her back wasn't a doctor, wasn't a specialist flown in from Europe. It was the homeless black girl the world had mocked the day before. But inside Lydia's room, none of that noise mattered. The lights had been dimmed now, quieter, warmer, as if the hospital itself was exhaling. Tessa sat in a chair pulled close to the bedside, her fingers still lightly touching Lydia's wrist. She hadn't slept. She barely blinked. Every time Lydia's breathing hitched, her own breath hitched with it. Richard stood by the window, arms crossed so tight his knuckles whitened. His face looked years older than it had 2 days ago, haunted, bruised with guilt, lit with something fragile and new. Hope. Maria, exhausted but determined, kept one eye on the monitors, one eye on the 2 girls whose lives had collided like destiny written in invisible ink. Lydia stirred. It wasn't much, just a tiny movement of her eyelashes, but the entire room leaned forward as if pulled by gravity. A soft sound escaped her, a tiny murmur. "Tess." Tessa froze. She didn't breathe. Her eyes widened, filling with tears. She said my name," she whispered, voice trembling. "She did," Maria murmured, "even if she doesn't understand why." Richard took a small step toward the bed, his voice low, cracking at the edges. "Lydia," he whispered, "sweetheart, can you hear me?" The child's eyelids fluttered again, then slowly lifted. Her gaze was unfocused at first, swimming in confusion and light. Then her eyes drifted, not toward her father, not toward the doctors, but straight to Tessa, the girl she had never met, the girl she had somehow known anyway. "Tess," she whispered again, barely audible. Something inside Richard shattered. He pressed a fist to his mouth, shoulders shaking once before he forced himself still. A man who had bought entire companies without flinching now couldn't stand on his own legs. Tessa leaned closer, hardly aware of anything but the fragile hand reaching for her. "Hey," she whispered, brushing a curl from Lydia's forehead. "You're okay. You're safe." Lydia blinked, slow and groggy. "Cold," she murmured. Tessa glanced at Maria, who nodded, grabbing an extra blanket. But Lydia's fingers clutched at Tessa's sleeve as if no amount of warmth mattered unless it came from her. Richard sank into the nearest chair, elbows on his knees, head bowed. Maria took a slow breath. "Richard," she said softly, "I think it's time." Richard looked up, eyes red, jaw tense. "Time for what?" "The truth." She walked to the corner storage cabinet and pulled out a worn folder. Its edges frayed, its color faded. Richard stared, confused. "What is that?" he asked. Maria didn't answer directly. Instead, she handed it to him. "You asked me once why your wife cried before she passed. You asked what she meant when she said, 'Don't lose her again.' You thought she was delirious." Richard swallowed hard. "Maria, don't do this now." "This," Maria said firmly, "is the only time." He hesitated, then opened the folder. A birth report. No, 2 birth reports. 2 infant footprints. 2 ID bracelets. And next to them, a photograph. A newborn child held in a nurse's arms, bundled in a faded pink blanket with a plastic charm bracelet around her wrist. Tessa stared at it. The bracelet charm she had lost in the storm looked exactly like the one in the picture. No one moved. Richard's lips parted, but no sound came out. He lifted the photo closer, his hands a trembling mess. "My God," he whispered, barely breathing. "No, that can't be." Maria stepped closer. "You were in shock, overwhelmed. Your wife's condition worsened. The hospital was understaffed that night. One baby was brought to you immediately. The other, fractionally smaller, slightly weaker, was moved to the transitional unit." Richard's face drained of color. "We tried to update the files later," Maria continued, voice shaking with her own buried guilt. "But by then, everything was chaos. There was an error, a missing transfer form, and no one ever came back for her. The system thought she'd been discharged. The shelter she ended up in thought she was a foundling. She had nothing to tie her to you except—" She looked at Tessa. "A plastic bracelet. No one thought mattered." Tessa felt the room tilting. Her fingers clutched the armrest. "You mean I was lost?" "You were left behind," Maria said gently. "Not abandoned, not unwanted. Lost." Richard pressed both hands to his face as if trying to hold together all the broken pieces inside him. Tears slipped through his fingers. "Tessa," he choked out. I didn't know. I swear on my life. I didn't know." Tessa stared at him. This man who was supposedly a giant in the world, who now looked as small as she had ever felt. "You left me," she whispered, voice shaking with 13 years of hunger, cold nights, and broken shelters. "You left me out there." Richard's voice cracked. "Your mother, she whispered your name only once. Tessa. I thought she was talking about Lydia. I didn't know she meant—" "Me?" Tessa whispered, tears spilling before she could stop them. "You didn't look for me?" Richard's face contorted. He folded forward, elbows braced on his knees, voice raw. "I thought I had one child. One. I didn't know there was another to look for. If I had known, Tessa, I would have moved heaven and earth to find you." For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Lydia, still weak, squeezed Tessa's hand gently. Her voice was a whisper only Tessa could hear. "Don't leave." The child who had never had a sister suddenly couldn't bear the thought of losing her. Tessa's jaw quivered. She looked from Lydia's pleading eyes to Richard's devastated face. Something inside her softened. Not forgiveness, not yet, but the first fragile crack in the wall she'd built around herself. She wiped her cheek with her sleeve. "I'm not going anywhere right now, okay?" she whispered to Lydia. "I'm here." Lydia exhaled, relieved. A doctor stepped in awkwardly, clearing his throat. "We need to run a genetic test to confirm—" "You don't need a test," Richard interrupted, voice low but steady. "Look at them." The doctor hesitated, then nodded. "Still, for records, we—" "Take whatever you need," Tessa said quietly. Richard looked at her with something new in his eyes. Respect, gratitude, awe. The test didn't take long. A swab, a few signatures. It would take hours for official results. But the truth already hung in the room like a living thing. Tessa wasn't just a miracle. She wasn't just a stranger. She wasn't just the girl who had saved Lydia twice. She was family. No one said it aloud, but every heart in the room already knew it. When the doctors left and the lights dimmed again, Richard approached Tessa slowly, like someone approaching a wounded animal, careful, gentle, afraid of doing more harm. "Tessa," he said softly, "you don't have to decide anything today, or tomorrow, or ever. But if you let me, I want to make this right. For you, for Lydia, for all the years you didn't get to live the way you should have." Tessa looked down at Lydia's hand wrapped around her own. "I don't know what to do," she whispered. "I don't know how to be anything except what I've been." Richard nodded, tears lingering in his eyes. "Then let us figure it out together." The room fell quiet again, peaceful in a way it hadn't been since the day Lydia fell sick. Somewhere down the hall, cameras clicked. News vans lined the street. The world was waiting, the story of the century already unfolding. But inside that softly lit room, none of that mattered, because after 13 lost years, two sisters had finally found each other, and nothing, no mistake, no file error, no lost bracelet, could ever separate them again. Morning crept over Manhattan slowly, slipping between the glass towers like a shy guest arriving late to a gathering. The city was barely waking, but the top floor of the Harrington penthouse was already alive with a strange mixture of quiet disbelief and fragile warmth, like a house that had forgotten how to feel alive. Tessa stood near the massive floor-to-ceiling windows, wrapped in a borrowed blanket. The skyline stretched beneath her like a glittering map of a world she had never imagined belonging to. Yellow cabs crawled below, tiny as toy cars. The East River shimmered under the rising sun. Everything felt surreal, like she was seeing a future meant for someone else. Behind her, soft footsteps approached. "Did you sleep at all?" Richard's voice was gentle, almost careful, as though speaking too loudly might break the spell. Tessa didn't turn yet. Her breath fogged a small oval on the glass. "A little," she murmured. "Not really." Then, after a beat, "I keep thinking someone's going to tell me this was all a mistake." Richard stepped closer but kept a respectful distance. It wasn't a mistake. His voice carried a conviction that felt stronger than anything he'd said since the day this nightmare began. "Not this time." Silence lingered, a soft, trembling silence that held too many unsaid things. Then a small, rustling sound broke it. From the hallway, clutching a stuffed bear to her chest, Lydia appeared. Her steps were tiny but determined. The doctors had cleared her for discharge only an hour earlier. Her face was still pale, but it held color now, life now. She looked no longer like a fading shadow, but like a child awakening from a long, terrible dream. When she saw Tessa, her face lit up with a fragile smile. Tessa turned fully this time. The blanket slipped from her shoulders as she hurried forward and knelt down. "Hey, Peanut," she whispered, brushing Lydia's hair back. "You okay?" Lydia nodded and wrapped her tiny arms around Tessa's neck. The embrace was so gentle yet so desperately certain that Tessa felt something inside her chest collapse, like a frozen lock breaking open. Richard watched them, breath shaky, eyes softening with something that looked a lot like grace. When Lydia pulled back, she held something in her hand, a small object wrapped in tissue. I found it," she whispered. Tessa unfolded the tissue. It was the bracelet charm. The very same shape as the one from the hospital photo, the tiny pink heart she thought she'd lost in the rain. Cleaned now, still scratched from years of wear, but somehow whole. "I saw it on the blanket," Lydia whispered. "The blanket Mama kept in her memory box. Daddy said she saved everything." The room went impossibly quiet. Tessa stared at the charm. "I thought it was gone forever." "Some things," Richard said softly, "have a way of coming back when they're meant to." He reached into his pocket and pulled out something else. A thin silver chain. "I had this made last night," he said, voice thick. "If you want it." He didn't push it toward her, didn't insist. He simply held it open in his palm, the chain shining under the morning light, waiting for her decision. Tessa swallowed hard. "Why are you doing all this?" Richard's chest rose and fell with a slow, heavy breath. "Because I failed you once," he said quietly. "I didn't know you existed, but I still failed you. And if you let me, I want to spend whatever years I have left making sure you never feel invisible again." The city hummed below them, cars honking distantly, the world carrying on, but inside the penthouse the moment stood frozen, delicate, sacred. Tessa finally nodded. Richard exhaled shakily and stepped forward. He lifted the chain and looped it around her neck, his hands barely touching her skin. When the clasp clicked, he stepped back, eyes shining. Lydia reached up, touched the small pink charm resting against Tessa's collarbone, and whispered, "Now you can't lose it again." Tessa gave a choked laugh, pulling the child into her arms. A knock sounded. Maria Benson stepped into the room with a soft smile. "The press is downstairs," she said gently. "They're asking questions, a lot of them." Richard tensed, but Maria raised a calming hand. "Don't worry, I didn't tell them anything. Not yet." She hesitated, then added, "But you'll have to say something soon." Richard nodded. "I will." "Together?" Maria asked, her eyes drifting between him and Tessa. Richard looked at Tessa. For the first time, he didn't look like a billionaire or a man with security teams and private jets. He looked human, flawed, hopeful. "If you want," he added quickly. "Only if you want." Tessa felt Lydia's fingers tighten around hers. She looked down at the child, her sister, and something inside her finally settled. "I'll stand with you," she said softly. "For her and for me." Maria smiled. "Good, because the world is about to meet the Harrington sisters." Richard's breath hitched at the sound of it. "Harrington sisters," he whispered, stunned. Lydia giggled. "I like that." Tessa brushed a thumb across Lydia's cheek. "Me too." A small, light-filled peace settled over them, so gentle it almost felt unreal. Richard cleared his throat, straightened his shoulders. "There's one more thing," he said, "before anything else happens." He walked toward a leather folio on the marble counter, opened it, and pulled out a document. Then he turned back to Tessa. "I've created a fund," he said, "a foundation for homeless children, for kids who get overlooked, forgotten, lost the way you were. It's called the Tessa Fund." His voice softened. "And I want you to help run it. Half of the board seats are yours." Tessa blinked, stunned beyond breath. "Me? Why me?" "Because you're the reason it exists," Richard said simply. "And because no one in this world knows better how to protect a child who doesn't have anyone. You've been one of them. You survived. And now, you can make sure others do too." Lydia tugged Tessa's sleeve. "Say yes," she whispered, "so we can help them." Tessa swallowed, her throat tight with emotion she'd never had space to feel before. "Yes," she said finally, voice trembling but certain. "I'll do it." Richard closed his eyes for a moment, as if in prayer. When he opened them, there was nothing but gratitude. Across the room, Maria discreetly wiped her cheek. A new chapter was beginning, not just for Tessa, not just for Lydia, not just for Richard, but for every forgotten child who lived on cold sidewalks and in crowded shelters. Two sisters reunited, a father forgiven, a family rebuilt from broken pieces. And a girl the world had once stepped over was now someone the world could never overlook again. Outside the penthouse, the morning sun rose fully, spilling gold across the room. Lydia reached for Tessa's hand. Richard stepped beside them, and for the first time in 13 years, their family walked forward together. If this story touched your heart, leave a comment below. Even just a simple one lets me know you're here, listening and feeling this with us. And if you want more stories like this, filled with heart, second chances, and life-changing twists, hit subscribe and stay with me. There are so many more journeys waiting for you.